It is a wonderful morning after a wonderful evening that we've had together here at large. Conference that I do believe will help us all build a bridge toward a conservative future in this country that will be inclusive of so many of you in this room. What you have to offer is very important. Again, I want to thank our host, the Hayride, Christy and Scott, for sponsoring and helping us do this, and our friends at Freedom Works for showing their support. Now this morning, we are going to, of course, open with prayer, and then we're going to have several key personalities to begin this program with Reverend Shannon Wright, and then Dr. Tim Johnson and my good friend Star Parker will keynote this prayer breakfast. Later on, we want to make certain that you're here for my good friend Jeff Landry. Well, there he is. Jeff Landry is back there. And Jason Hebert will be there. For those of you north of the Mason-Dixon line or north of Alexandria, that is not Hebert down here, that is Hebert. Okay, and so, of course, he may pronounce it Hebert, I don't know. But just the same, we're going to have a wonderful time here today, and then we're going to cap the evening off with a message from a woman who I greatly admire, my good friend, Deneen Bareilles. So we have a fully packed day, and I believe, Pastor Wright, you're on to open with prayer, is that right? And we're going to now invite Pastor Wright up to open with prayer. Let us be prayerful, because as we mentioned last night, there are difficult days ahead of us, and we do indeed need to prepare for the journey that we're on. Pastor Wright.
It's like you're looking through a telescope. You see where you're gonna be. Growing, getting better. You're not the person they see. Can't be mad at the things you've been through, 'cause they built your.
Good morning. Y'all hear me? Okay, wait, I can't hear y'all. This is supposed to be, this is not sleep time. Wake up.
All right.
We got a full day coming on.
All right. Yay.
My bishop told me that prayer is not something you just say, it's an exercise. So let's get the blood flowing. So we got Mary playing in the background. Because the whole point of this song is go get your blessing. And I was taught that to get your blessing, you have to be a blessing. So my prayer this morning is for God. I pray strength for every politically active that is an elected official, that's a candidate, that you get your blessing by being a blessing. That you have strength in God. That you use that strength to give you a spirit of boldness. So that you can not just do the usual and the normal, but that you can earn your blessing. That you have the strength to tell the folks you work with to stand tall and be proud. I pray your strength to tell people as you go forward and represent them in truth. Tell them to speak truth to power. I pray your ability to do that. So when folks ask you a question, I pray your strength to be able to tell them, no, we don't believe in same-sex marriage. I pray your strength to tell them we believe in life from conception. I pray your strength to tell them that we believe, not as man says, but as the Bible says, from the beginning and the dawn of time. That is my prayer for all of you this morning, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Now the program will proceed as it is written. One of the things that I almost detest in a MC or a moderator is a guy has to jump up and down all the time. And so I know everybody in here, I'm presuming that everybody here can read. You do have a program. So if you see your name on the program, you're next. So whoever's next, come on up and let the program move along as it is printed.
I guess we heard from the Reverend this morning, didn't we? First of all, giving honor to Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I want to thank you all for coming here today, and I want to thank Reverend C.L. Bryant for an opportunity to speak before you all this morning. I have 15 minutes, and I don't want to necessarily take up all 15 minutes, but I do want to lay a few things in your heart as we prepare for this day. And I had the opportunity of going before my friend, Star Parker, as I'm sure that she's going to deliver another one of her outstanding conversations with us this morning. There are two things that I think are very important representing the Frederick Douglass Foundation. We have 24 chapters around the country. And on behalf of our leadership team, that includes Dean Nelson and Troy Rowland, we're very thankful for the many opportunities that we've been blessed with as it relates down to being part of this new movement that's taking place in the United States. Something that I think is critical to our success and something that's going to be valuable to our success in 2014 and 2016, as I'm sure many of you are looking forward to an opportunity to ensure that we maintain control of Congress, i.e. the House of Representatives, but also take over the Senate and prepare things so that we can reclaim our rightful place in the White House. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes. Here, here.
But not only are those things important on the national level, but we need to be making sure that we do the same thing here in local levels, both at the state level as well as the county and city environments. Oftentimes you hear us talk about the grassroots campaign and grassroots efforts, but too often times we don't spend enough time talking about those things that are affecting us each and every day, i.e. the city and the county. So there are two things that we're doing at the Frederick Douglass Foundation that I think are very important. So let me tell you what those two things are. The first thing is that we're starting our own initiative called Success in Politics. And just to give you kind of an idea of what that looks like, the first thing is that in order for us to be successful, how many candidates do we have in this room right now? Potential candidates? As I stated last night, I'm the former vice chairman of the North Carolina Republican Party, so I know a little bit about how the system works. The first thing I want to challenge you all to do is that you have to decide that you want to be committed. Committed to the cause, committed to the efforts, and committed to our principles within our party, because one of the challenges that we have today is that we have a lot of people that call themselves Republicans, but when it comes down to what they believe, they really don't back it up with their actions.
Here, 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 here. Here, here, talk, man.
We've got to decide as a community that we're no longer going to be satisfied with people who talk a good game but don't know how to walk a game. And that means that we've got to spend some effort doing some vetting ourselves. We've got to make sure that those individuals that have a R next to their name, who call themselves conservatives, are truly conservative. As you heard the Reverend Wright already say, that you are not pro-life. If you're not about traditional marriage, you already have a question for me.
Yeah.
Because I need to understand where you're coming from. And if you can't be steadfast on those two issues right off the bat, then we're going to have some concerns when it talks about education, when we talk about incarceration, when we talk about unemployment, and we talk about a whole host of other things. We're already going to have some problems because you're wobbling and going back and forth. And so that's the first one, is that we've got to get people that are committed. The second one is that we've got to have people that know how to communicate. As you heard so well last night, talking about runaway slaves, one of our biggest problems that the Reverend asked was, how many of us talk about the history of the Republican Party? How many of us know the history of the Republican Party? How many of these people know that the Republican Party was founded March 20th, 1854? If you don't know that, then you got to ask yourself why you don't know that. See, I find it interesting that we as Christians talk a good game, but when you say, have you read from Genesis to Revelation, most people can say John 3:16, and that's about as far as they come. How can you really call yourself a Christian if you haven't even taken the time and you're over the age of 20 to read the Bible at least once? How can you call yourself a Republican? A Republican if you don't know what our party stands for. Our party has 9 principles, 9 simple principles. With the last one being that we believe the Republican Party is the best vehicle to make these things happen, and yet so many of you in this room don't know those principles. You see, you can't have a conversation with a liberal if you don't understand what we stand for. And that's how they beat us up all the time. We've also got to take time to have pride in those individuals that look like us, who believe like us, and who have been out there doing the work. Because too often times we want to talk about Allen West, or we want to talk about Tim Scott, but you know there's a whole lot of Star Parkers out there.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of Tim Johnson, there's a whole lot of King Carl Smiths out there, but we don't take the time to talk about them. We want to pick 4 or 5 people, and all of a sudden they're the representative for all Republicans.
Right.
We've got to do a better job of communicating our message. And what I would say is that we have our calendar, the Frederick Douglass Foundation calendar, and it's a great opportunity to learn about the history that most of you don't know, because we should be bragging about the Emancipation Proclamation 150-year anniversary this year, because Abraham Lincoln signed that January 1st. And we should be bragging about the I Have a Dream speech that Dr. Martin Luther King made August 28th, because he was a Republican. And we should be bragging about Jackie Robinson in the number 42, that the movie just came out, because he also was a Republican. But see, many of you don't know that. And so if you don't know the history, then when it comes down to being in your toolbox, you don't have the tools necessary to have a conversation that you need to have to convince your friends that they need to relook at the Republican Party. And then finally, we need to be consistent. Ladies and gentlemen, too often times we get excited about the 6 or 7 days before an election process, and all of a sudden we want the black community, the Hispanic community, every other community to come to the table. You know, it might be nice if we did things 365 days a year. We actually took time to get to know our community. We took time to get involved in our community. We took time to deliver a message. We took time to make sure people know that as a Republican, I care about the community. As a Republican, I care about the things that are happening in our society. It would be a beautiful thing if we did that, but too often times we wait 2 or 3 months before an election cycle, and all of a sudden, it's time to talk to these communities. We've got to change that. We've got to look at 2014 and say that I'm committed to making a difference. I'm committed to having my voice heard. I'm committed to making sure that there's a change, a new voice. And the only way that's going to change is that we're serious about being consistent. But that's one side of the coin that I think we have an opportunity to do. The other side of the coin is something very simple, but I want to put this on all the hearts in this room. Back in the 1930s, 1940s, there was a man by the name of James G. Thompson, and he came out with Double Victory campaign. Some of you may have heard about it. If you know anything about history, you know about the black community. He wrote a letter saying that while we're talking about victory abroad with the Germans and the Japanese, we're not talking about the victory of black folks. And so the Frederick Douglass Foundation said that we're going to do something, that we're going to reignite this. And the intent of the Double Victory campaign is we want victory for the Republican Party, but we also want victory for black conservatives. We want double victory. Because see, if we continue to have the same thing go on in our society, that all we do is elect the same people, and we start having the same, or we continue to have the same problems we have with blacks not getting elected. Star Parker ran, she didn't get elected. Bill is around there somewhere, he didn't get elected. We can go on and on and on. We have to make sure that we change the dynamic. We have never had a black woman represent the Republican Party in the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate, ever, in the history of this country. And we've never had a black female serve as governor of any state at any time of any party in U.S. history. This is 2013. Isn't it time that we make some changes?
Yeah.
Isn't it time that we make some commitments? Isn't it time that we stop talking about what we're going to do for somebody and put some money behind it? Isn't it time that we stop talking about what we're going to do for somebody and make sure that we're volunteering for them? Isn't it time that we stop talking about what we're going to do and we make sure that we vet and we support those candidates that we say we supposedly love so much? It's time for us to get serious. So if we want to have victory for our party, and I'm a Republican through and through, but I also want to make sure the black conservative voice is heard. And I want to make sure that each one of you understand that if we're serious about this conference, the new majority, then that means we've got to do things different. We've got to be strong, we've got to persevere, and we've got to be committed. God bless and thank you.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here at large, a conference for the new majority. And thank you, Tim, for those kind words about my failed election. And in fact, now it's become a major part of my bio when the left is talking about her failed run. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. One reason that we lost is because 5 months is just not enough time to undo 50 years of social engineering, and that has been done in the black community. One of the biggest challenges we ran into is that the district, I didn't live there. The Republican Party at that point had responded to call of Michael Steele, then the chairman, to make sure that they ran somebody in every district. When they went to Hawaii, the 168 of those that make up the Republican Party, the leaders of the party, a couple of them from each state, when they went away to Hawaii that year, they came back with a command to put somebody in every district, because what had happened, because of all the gerrymandering, is the Republican Party just weren't running anyone anymore. So when the California delegation came back, they looked at all the districts. They of course said, oh God, we had to go into these neighborhoods we've not been in like 20, 30 years. Who shall we select? And so I was asked to return from Washington, D.C. and then go in a district I've never lived in, because I, 20 years ago, escaped Los Angeles County, moved to Orange County. And I'm behind the orange curtain and I like it there. I go into LA only so that I can do two things: visit with my grandkids. My 7-year-old grandson, I'm teaching him how to fish, and my 1-year-old granddaughter, I'm teaching her how to shop. So I have to go up to LA to do that. So I went in that district, and what was interesting about it is prior to gerrymandering, it was a Republican district. But when they drew a Berlin Wall right down the city of Long Beach and separated out the Republicans from the liberals and drew about 5 streets in Compton into the newly formed district, the Republican Party picked up its ball and bat and went home. It was a Republican district. They hadn't run anyone in that district in 20 years. So we had our work cut out for them. So I do agree with you, Tim, that there's work to be done, and we need to take seriously the opportunities in front of us. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak to you today. And at this conference, I understand that we're to talk about at large, you know, and what that means. He said it's not in confinement or captivity, at liberty. And what has happened to African American communities, we haven't been at liberty a long time. We've been convinced to move from slavery to Jim Crow to the welfare state, and that is a challenge for us today. And so I want to talk a little bit about those challenges, because changing the black quest for social justice to a quest for economic empowerment is going to be hard work. And I'm just glad to see so many that are committed to doing some of that work. A lot of people know me because they see me on Fox, and I know that Denine's in the room, and when you go out traveling, they tell you, oh, you look so much pretty in person, because they just want to come to your meeting just to see you in person. I think, thank you, and others read my column. I'm a syndicated columnist with Scripps News Service and have been for about 10 years now. We have about 400 papers in the country. Some of my papers, like the Korean Times, runs me every single week, and what's fascinating about that particular paper is that the whole paper is in Korean except the editorial page, and there I am. You know, so you run into different fans that are looking at you from a different angle. So a lot of people think they know me, but what they might not know about me, I'll tell a little bit about today, just so that you'll get a perspective on who I am and why I'm aggressively in the battle that we are, and so appreciating what CL and his team are doing with this great conference. You know, I've been in public life now for 25 years, and a lot of people know my story, know that as a young woman I was on welfare. You know, I tell people I got caught up in the lie of the left. I believe that the poor were poor because the wealthy were wealthy. I believe that my problems were somebody else's fault, and I believe that America was so inherently racist that I didn't have to mainstream. And I ended up spiraling into a little dark hole where after a Christian conversion, I was able to just change my life. I completed college and I went and started a business. For people that want more details, I've said my details over and over again. I don't have time this morning, they've only given me 30 minutes, but I did bring a few copies of my book, Uncle Sam's Plantation, where I talk about my personal story. It's not my autobiography, but even that is not all the way complete because of statutes of limitations I wasn't sure about. I didn't put all the details there. You know, Deneen and I were just familiarizing ourselves a little bit about where we're from, and even though we run into each other all the time in the green room at Fox, we found out that we actually grew up near each other in New Jersey. At least I went to high school there. And so her husband then chimed in and said, aren't you so glad that that was before the internet and DNA? And I'm like, yeah. So I left right after high school and went to California, but and was in Los Angeles. And after the 92 Los Angeles riots, I began to work in public policy. I worked on welfare reform from 94 to 96, and then I founded my current organization, CURE, and we're the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. We are a policy think tank. We promote market-based solutions to fight poverty. We've been headquartered in Washington, D.C. now for 7 years, and I hope that if you're in the Capitol that you'll come by and visit us, stop by and visit us. In fact, my pro-life friends are not only stopping by and visiting us, now they're bringing their suitcases with them, and I'm noticing that our library is getting more and more materials in it, which I welcome you to do as well. We have a wonderful location at 13th and F in Northwest, right there, 2 blocks from the White House, and we're in the historical Sun Building across the street from the National Press Club. I started the work of CURE because I knew firsthand about the political promises of entitlement and how they had caused generations to be pathologically dependent on centralized planning and government programs. And I concluded, like many Americans, especially some of the Americans that are hosting this particular meeting, that are now fast friends of Freedom Works and are starting to push these ideas into communities that we haven't visited in a long time, ideas of traditional values and limited government and free markets and strong national allegiance and defense. I mean, for the first time in my adult life, we're beginning to see the American flag like never before, not only in Washington, D.C., but all across this country, where people are able to point out fellow patriots, and I think that that is a healthy thing. Traditional values has to be a focus because choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what we choose. Limited government, because the role of government is to protect private property and personal pursuits, not to plunder them, not to exploit them. And of course, free markets, because profit is good, profit is moral. Profit gives us the engine, the capital, to invest in the future advances so that we can create jobs. And it's fascinating to me how we disconnect ourselves on how we get the very jobs that we keep saying we want. And then, of course, a strong national allegiance and defense. And my life story embodies American exceptionalism. So I take exception to people who say that we're not exceptional, because what my life story proves is that anyone from any background or ethnicity, anyone that even needs just another start in life, can get that fresh start. They can be born again, they can set some new goals, and they can realize their dreams. So I was very grateful when the Tea Party showed up in 2009 in Washington, because they came to talk about American socialism, and I had talked about American socialism in my second book, the book I only have a few copies of out for anyone that doesn't have it already. I have opportunity for you to get it for $20. I also have our newsletter, but that's for free. And you can have a copy of that if you want to, but don't be surprised if I then ask you for a donation to my organization, because I'm an entrepreneur. But I talked about American socialism in that book that I re-released last year, but wrote 10 years ago. You know, and up until the Tea Party showed up, I had grown to agree with one of my colleagues who, when I moved there full time about 7 years ago, I'm kind of bi-coastal, but people say that must be really difficult. I'm like, if you've ever been on a 405 freeway in LA, no, this is easy, you know, to go across the country and do your work and then go back home. But when it's kind of like when you go on vacation and you're going somewhere on a regular basis and you just really love the place, and then finally you move in and you start seeing things that you didn't see before, like you never noticed the roaches. Well, Washington, D.C. is a lot like that, and so I saw a very interesting opportunity. It was two political enemies. They were having dinner together, enjoying bread and wine and laughter, and you know, I looked at this and asked my colleague about it. He said, you know, there's an old saying in Washington that politics is like professional wrestling. The conflict's for the crowd, because at the end of the day, they're in business, and they're in the same business. And and what happens in business, and in particular business in Washington, D.C., is what happens in most businesses when people work together. Their children grow up together. They have a lot of opportunities to spend quality private time together, and it's one of the reasons that Washington has been so out of control. And another reason that I so appreciate this opportunity to be part of opening a new chapter in dialogue within the Black community. And so I do thank you, CL, for inviting me. Because one question that has been long overdue to ask after 50 years of government intervention into the affairs of Black people is, where are Blacks today with regards to the social justice that they have been taught to quest through politics? Social justice defined: the act of redistribution of wealth, the great equalizer, the level playing field between the haves and the have-nots, those that were able to enjoy the movie as I did last night. For the first time, I'm just not a movie watcher. It was nothing offensive about that. I just never have sat down to watch movies. 2 hours, me, someone else's creativity. not be able to say anything? No, my friends know not to take me to movie theaters. They've tried a few times, but they just won't ever go back again as we're escorted out, because I'm just not going to let somebody sit there and indoctrinate me without having something to say back. But I did enjoy that movie. It was a little tough to sit there, and Ben Seal's wife did talk to quite a bit of it. But you know, we saw that messaging of those that are part of the Socialist Party, and that's those that are defined in social justice, this great equalizer, the rich and the poor, the discussions there, the privileged versus the underclass. And some now are going as far to say out loud, as the president of Zimbabwe, that we're going to take from the sons of the enslavers and give it to the sons of the enslaved. So for after 50 years, blacks have been taught to put liberal policies and politicians above all other concerns, above their faith, above their family, above their freedom, in exchange for social justice. Black culture now is all about social justice. And you know, it's interesting, I'm reading this new book on organizational development, which, you know, I'm growing my group, and I bought the book because of, you know, building out a team, you know, but then you got to storm it, then you got to normalize things and hope that you can get some production out of these folks. So I wanted to get a little bit insight, but what's fascinating about this particular book is the first chapter is on culture. And as I'm reading this book, thinking I'm getting new information about how to build out a organizational culture within my business, I'm seeing black culture and black America, and actually it's full of different strategies that I hope that we'll adopt as we look forward to moving into these harder hit communities. Because when you start changing culture and it becomes this embedded, it will help us understand a lot of the venom that comes at anyone that decides to dispute their worldview. And it is definitely embedded in our culture. And so I just wanted to say that aside for somebody that wants to get a deeper understanding in what has broken down, why are they so vicious toward anyone that would dare to escape, and how do we then change it? That if you just copy that first chapter, you might get some new insight. But liberals, they always pretend that they're against war, but in their quest for power, they started 3 wars against the American culture, and they convinced blacks to look the other way in the black quest for social justice. The civil rights generation of the 50s wanted revival. Dr. King was a preacher. You wouldn't even know that if you went to his memorial. I don't know if you noticed that when you went to his memorial. There is not one symbol that he was a preacher. They don't have reverend, they don't have pastor, and there's not one scripture. You would think that he was a social justice activist and a community organizer. And in fact is barely anything there that talks about the civil rights movement. Much of the discussion is about Vietnam and demilitarization and unions aside. But the civil rights movement, he was a pastor. This was a moral movement, and it was a movement for repentance and revival. But the black power generation of the 70s wanted revenge. And even though mountains of data point to the connection between religion and traditional marriage to civil order, protection of private property, and economic prosperity, blacks got caught up in the political promises of social justice and became the casualties of 3 liberal cultural wars. The first liberal cultural war, and I was hearing last night that we want to start looking for and exchanging terminology about whether we're discussing liberal or conservative. They're both political terms, and so we've grown accustomed to it. But I heard last night that perhaps progressive would be one word that we would use more often to expose their lies. Well, I'll use progressives about these wars. The first war that they started in the 60s was the war on religion, which weakened our public institutions and opened a door to a culture of corruption. When you look at your legislators, your lawmakers at 13% approval rating, I mean, this is not healthy. You can tell that we have diminished ourselves by taking away moral order. We've scrubbed our schools of all reference to God. In 1962, the Supreme Court struck down state-sponsored school prayer. In 1963, the courts ruled you cannot read the Bible or recite the Lord's Prayer in public schools. By 1980, the courts ruled to remove the 10 Commandments from the public schools. The second war that the liberal progressives declared was a war on marriage, which weakened women and opened the door for a culture of meaninglessness. Homosexuality now is dividing us and bringing hostility into the public square. What is the result for blacks? AIDS is in the top 2 killers of black women today between 25 and 34. The answer to that question is all sexual behavior is adult behavior. Keep it private. And I'm getting ready to expose some things that are on the New York City's website about sexual matters that are unbelievable. In fact, they are so repulsive that it reminds me of the scripture that says we are not even to speak of these things in public. And yet it's the city, with city money in partnership with organizations like Planned Parenthood, that are so repulsive that we must address because they are exploiting then the new look, if you will, which is called ethnically ambiguous. You know, it's a term out of Hollywood. My daughter's an actress, and when you get categorized in there, you get a lot of work because people can't really tell what you are, but they know that you're not blonde and blue, and they are not blonde and blue in this campaign of the city of New York. Abortion has deeply hurt us, and we'll hear a lot more about that later because my fast friend Ryan Bomberger is in the room, and he will be bringing that presentation, and I see him quite often visiting now at our office in Washington, D.C., and I appreciate that. We got coffee there too. I think Alvita's there right now. I heard your conference room is being reserved. For who? Alvita and her team. Okay. 55 million dead in 40 years should give us all a great pause. 55 million. Now, the left wants to say, well, we're just serving up the marketplace, that we're just trying to fill a supply for a demand of abortion. I am not convinced that over 1 million women a year would be killing their offspring if abortion weren't legal. The result for blacks, gosnells preying on the most poor and the most vulnerable. I mean, to have to read about 14-year-olds who had a 14-year-old girl who was in the clinic who had an 8-month abortion. And as his defense said in the courts in Philadelphia before he was handed down his sentence, what did you think we were doing in the clinics? And we're talking about abortion. What do you think it is? And especially if it's late term. How do you get a child out of a womb and throw it out as trash if you're not dismembering and cutting up? In fact, remember, Gosnell was a part of the Mother's Day Massacre, where they were trying a new late-term experiment where they would put razor blades together and put gel to hold them in place while after they inserted it into the woman, the gel would melt down, and then the results would be discarded as trash. In 1960, 75% of American adults were married compared to around 50% today. In 1960, 45% of young adults between 18 and 24 were married compared to just 9% today. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was president, 18% of births were outside of marriage compared to 43% today. 1.7 million out-of-wedlock births in 2011 alone. Blacks moved from 22% in the 60s of out-of-wedlock births to 72% today. Whites moved from 3% in the 60s to just under 3% today. Hispanics, while there's no data in the 60s because they weren't a special interest group being exploited for political reasons, they didn't separate them out as a particular group. But today we have data, and Hispanic out-of-wedlock birth rates are at 53%. The third war that these progressives declared was a war on poverty. And what was interesting about their wars is they were all during the same time that blacks were saying, remove governmental barriers so we can live free. At the same time that a group of spiritual men took charge of our community to say that we are going to fight for the right to live like Americans and have this country move themselves back to their founding documents. It was a moral cry, and we have moved away from that, and we ended up with these 3 wars going on at the very same time, coupling rules of engagement, as you heard last night, the means test over welfare policy, don't work, don't save, don't get married, in an environment of sexual meaninglessness to where we tell women you own yourself and there are no absolute guidelines to your sexuality anymore. In fact, there are no longer natural consequences. We now have safety nets. Well, this opened the door to a culture of entitlements. It weakened family. The Great Society has had great cost. In just 50 years, blacks went from 70% of children being raised by married parents to 70% being raised by single parents today. In just 50 years, blacks went from a civil rights movement to remove governmental barriers over education to current black male dropout rates in most neighborhoods at 70% today. In just 50 years, blacks went from landowners and entrepreneurs to today, less than 5% of blacks even own their own business, with the majority of those businesses as mom and pops with incomes around $100,000 a year or less. The legacy of our 50-year quest for social justice is our blighted inner cities, our dysfunctional government-run schools, and our broken black families. How can we build a community of free and prosperous people if we are a community of irresponsible people? If our goal as blacks is to gain economic empowerment, then we must begin immediately to reverse the laws and the programs of big government progressives that created an environment of moral relativism, sexual recklessness, and economic envy. So today our first order of business must be to get the message of freedom and personal responsibility into the communities hit hardest by these 3 cultural wars. And so as we were hearing last night about this new program to go into colleges, I've been in a lot of colleges across this country, and it's a very hostile environment. In fact, I've been in 190 colleges in every state in the union. When I went into my final state a couple of months ago, North Dakota, I said, now what will I do? I sat on first class on an airplane, I was like, wow, I just left my 50th state union, now what do I do? And the guy next to me chimed in, he said, well, you can go to the libraries. And I didn't know we were on our way to a city that houses Truman's Library. And I said, well, I don't go to Democrat libraries. And he said, well, Truman's Library is in Independence, Missouri, and actually if he were alive today, he'd be a Republican. So I said, well, maybe I will go visit there. Then I started telling about all the libraries across the country, you know, how George Bush's is pretty interesting. He hasn't burned the wall, but he's a collector of any and everything to do with the Wild West. So if you want to see any of the gold, any of the posters, any of the guns, they're down here, they're at his library in College Station. But the most fascinating is Gerald Ford's, believe it or not. I mean, he was pretty much a boring president, but if you go into his library, you're walking through these stark halls, but the minute you walk into the first room, all of a sudden a disco ball starts turning and the Age of Aquarius starts playing, and you're like, what in the world is going on? And then you hear a king in one corner, and you hear Kennedy in another, and you hear all of this activity at the same time, and then you just hear a shot and everything goes quiet. And so I suppose their message is he's the great stabilizer. But he's telling me I should go to libraries, and the other guy says, well, why don't you just visit the state capitals? And I thought, now that would be pretty interesting to do. So I've been on those college campuses, but I think that the strategy that CL is working out with his team through outreach at the Freedom Works and with Deneen is to go in there and have discussion, not debate, discussion about what has happened to blacks. Because blacks must first begin to understand that the first step to economic empowerment is to recognize the humanity of every individual and their ability to live free. You know, the steps out of poverty are not rocket science, but people need to be free to take them. And it's insulting that liberals pretend they care about the poor, yet they stand in the way of school choice vouchers and personal responsibility, both measures to put one on the path to economic prosperity and independence. The poor more than anyone need help getting their children out of broken schools and from under broken healthcare policy, broken housing policy, broken retirement policy, and broken welfare policy. The poor more than anyone need to understand the nature of money, the principles of capitalism, and compound interest. They have been locked in these government cesspools we call schools for 50 years, and they've been learning multiculturalism and diversity. And yet our country is founded on principles of e pluribus unum, many becoming one. That was what was interesting even in Truman's library, because I did go. And he has the original rug that shows e pluribus unum, because they were dealing with, during that time, similar challenges that we're dealing with during our time, to bring in people of different ethnicities and cultures, and how do you pull them together? They had a lot of Irish and Italians and others coming into the country at the same time, and they needed to build out an Americanism, American culture, and American exceptional culture. This is why CURE works with the media and policy, with our network of conservative urban churches around this country, so that we can work on these ideas to get school choice, to get understanding. And I look forward to working with this new project of Freedom Works to get messengers and leaders into discussions with fellow blacks. And I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Star Parker.